And so I'm going to start by really doing an introduction of what public engagement means and an overview of research, and then Emily's going to take it over in terms of talking about what we've done here on campus with graduate students and faculty members. And then we're going to end with a little bit more of what we're doing for future research. So that being said, the first question is, why does science communication and engagement matter? And I probably don't really have to sell this idea to you all since you're in this colloquium. But the basic idea of it is that science is complex, politicized, controversial, widespread societal implications, and so what that means is who gets to decide about science in society, since it's going to impact everyone. How do we decide as a society what it looks like to have science, especially with controversial emerging technologies like human genome editing? How does it going to play out in society? What does it mean? How will it impact everyone's lives? And so because we have questions about who gets to decide what happens with this, that means that public engagement can be one of those means of deciding, and we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about what exactly science engagement means. But beyond just how science works in society, we also have questions about what does it mean to be a land-grant university, and how can the campus and community have a gap that's bridged between the two in terms of what gets produced on campus and how does that impact people in the community, and what do universities give back to their communities. So first we're going to talk about different approaches to science communication. There's been a little bit of a renaissance in terms of how people approach science communication. We start with basically a model of public understanding of science, and that really focuses on a one-way directional communication, so from scientists to the public. And so it was really focused on increasing knowledge with the idea that with the knowledge deficit model, that if you give people more information about science, they're going to support it. They're going to think the way that you want them to think about the issue. And so as a community, we've moved away a little bit from that model, or at least hopefully we have. And so we have a couple different models. Knowledge deficit is the one we talked about. The next one is contextual model, and that is that it's really tied to a particular interest, so people will engage in issues. People have science communication and be willing to learn about issues if it's really related to the context. So you're going to communicate in ways that are very specific to a certain issue. So if someone's interested in Zika, then if you have communication about it, then maybe they'll be a little bit more involved, and you're going to try to help them to understand scientific issues that are science that is really focused on that one issue. Lay expertise model is another one, and that really focuses on a little bit more of a broad approach, so saying that members of the public can have expertise in certain areas, and so it's a slightly more open view in terms of who's the expert scientist versus the public. And then the last one is the one that we're really going to focus on today, and that's public engagement model. And so this one really focuses on a two-way exchange of information. So members of the public and members of the scientific community both hold information. They both have knowledge about different topics, and it really focuses on exchanging that information, sharing knowledge, building a mutual understanding about different scientific issues. So something related to human genome editing would then be, so we have scientists who are experts on how the science behind it works, and members of the public who are more experts on what they want this technology to look like, how they want it to impact their daily lives. So within that, there's generally two types of events that would fit under the umbrella of public engagement. And the first one we have is decision making. So this is something more like a policy meeting, focus groups, public meetings that really look at having a policy recommendation. So for agriculture biotechnology, there are a lot is done in terms of public engagement with respect to a decision making. So you have members of the public who come, there's a panel of experts, they can ask the expert questions, they can look at some of the research, and then when you go away from this event, what you have is these members of the public come up with a document or recommendation for what policy should look like. The other type of event we have is more dialogue based. And so this is really focused on, like we were talking about before, the mutual understanding, building knowledge, trying to understand where the two parties can meet and how that outcome. So it's building a mutual understanding. So I just talked about that. So direct political outcome, meaning construction, and then exchange between actors who can influence policy. So beyond just building a mutual understanding, you can have members of the public maybe influencing how scientists or other experts, politicians, who will later actually build the policy, that they can at least have input and maybe influence how this affects them. So now that we've talked a little bit about what the model looks like, we're going to bring in another variable, which is social media. So the question becomes, how has social media changed public engagement, or has it at all? So we looked traditionally at engagements being in person, the dialogue, the decision making, so it's really the one-on-one exchange. But with social media, it can really change how that interaction happens and where it occurs. So you have, not only is it that maybe experts say, hey, I want to have a public engagement or deliberative forum where you have members of the public impacting this policy, but instead now members of the public can reach out to experts, they can reach out to policymakers on social media and say, hey, we really want to have the chance to have an input. So the source of where the impetus for the engagement event and where the interaction comes from has really been maybe a little bit more broad in social media. This is something that we're going to talk about a little bit more, is whether this is actually occurring, but hypothetically at least, this is what can occur. And there's also the number of opportunities related to that, where again, it's more broad in the social media, where people can just reach out any time of the day, any time of the night, and really get engaged in these topics. It doesn't have to be in a set place or a set way. So then that becomes, is there a new norm of open science? And again, this is something we're going to look more into. People have talked about social media in terms of extending the extended peer review. So we have issues where after the publication is made, then members of the community, scientific community and the public community can talk about publications on social media. It's not just, it went through the peer review process and now it's done. Now it's a little bit more open in terms of who can comment on it, who can talk about it, who can discuss what it is. And again, this is helping with open science dialogues in terms of who wants to talk about these issues. And so the question is, does this actually match reality? So before we get into those issues, we're going to talk a little bit more about what research has been done on public engagement. And so we have generally two buckets of research that look at it. So one is a more case study approach, and so it looks at like a very specific issue, a very specific event of public engagement, and it looks at who engaged, what was the topic, what did they do, and how did they do it, and it's really focused on evaluating these policy outcomes. So it's looking at, there's a deliver forum in this location at this time, and let's take a really close, in-depth look at it and see what happened. Another approach of doing this is more empirical research on the impacts. So asking, rather than focusing really on what the event was, what happened, what occurred, but focusing on, did public engagement actually have an impact? And so one example I have of this is research that we've done through this group with the Wisconsin Science Festival. And so we had a panel on human genome editing with a number of experts. And so we had a pre-test, post-test. So we asked people going into the event a number of questions, and we asked the same questions as they were leaving the event. And what we found was that the public engagement events can actually have an impact on these people when they're leaving the event. So we had an increase in their knowledge, an increase in the perceptions that human genome editing is a risk to society, an increase in perceptions that it can benefit society, and we also had a change in the moral acceptability. So people viewed human genome editing as more morally acceptable after the event. So not going to focus too much on this, but I'm happy to answer more questions. But what we want to take away from this is that public engagement can have an impact on people. And so this is one of the reasons why it's important to study who's involved in these decisions and what they are. The other aspect we have is from the scientist's perspective. So not only can it have an impact on members of the public, but what does it do for, why do scientists want to be involved? What type of an impact it can have on them? What are their views on this? So previous research has really looked at the frequency of engagement, so what have scientists done in terms of public engagement, and also looked at the individual predictors of engagement. So this can be factors such as seniority status in the lab, opportunity, what field they are in has an impact on it, gender, motivations and barriers, and perceptions of views of the public, as well as the role of scientists. And so Emily will talk a little bit more about these factors in a couple minutes, but just to give you an overview of what other studies have done. Another thing they have is perceptions of their fields, and this is really relevant to emerging technologies. So within our research group, we've had science studies that looked at nanoscientists and synthetic biologists to really understand where they see the future of the field going and how they think that public engagement can be involved in these fields. So just to give you a preview what some of that data can look like, we had a survey in 2015 of synthetic biologists, and so we asked them different questions about how often they engaged in public outreach efforts. And so we had that So synthetic biology is synthetic biologists, and the LC are those who work with the ethical, legal, and social implications of the technology. So this is actually illustrating to the differences in the fields. So the people in the LC category, more social scientists, legal experts. Synthetic biologists are those who actually work with the technology. And so here we have that within this technology, people at least infrequently engage. So people are already participating within these fields in public engagement. And so Emily will talk a little bit more, like I said, too, with how this looks on campus, but just to give you a sense of what this type of data looks like and that scientists are actually engaging beyond just at the UW campus. So with that being said, research we've done here, the Wisconsin Science Festival and the Human Genomic Panel, like we've talked about already. We've also had a number of scientist surveys, including faculty members in 2006, and then graduate students in 2017, and that was in collaboration with Julia, as Dominique mentioned earlier. And then we also are exploring really this idea of public engagement in the Wisconsin idea. So does everyone here know what the Wisconsin idea is? No? Got a few no's? Okay. So the Wisconsin idea is this, it's I shall never be content until the beneficent influence of the university reaches every family in the state. And so it's that idea of whatever is produced on campus in terms of research and knowledge should have an impact for the community surrounding the campus. So giving back to the community, and it's really focused in this idea of service learning, well not service learning, sorry, service, and then also making sure that things that are produced on campus are helpful for everyone. And so with that in mind, Emily will talk a little bit more about these ideas, and then we're actually going to come back to the idea at the end with the Wisconsin idea and looking more closer to land-grant universities in general.
Cool, thank you. All right, so can I switch you?
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, so as Kate mentioned, and let me know if you can't hear me at any point. I'm on the edge of losing my voice. Hopefully it doesn't happen now. But I'll be focusing in on these scientist surveys. So in addition to just looking at actual engagement events, we still use surveying tools to get a sense of not just the people who are participating in this one engagement event, but more broadly, in this case, what do scientists think of engagement? And both ones I'll focus on are looking at UW in particular. And then after that, I'll go into a little bit of what questions this study in particular left us with, which will go into the work that Kate is starting now that will move beyond this. So the big question that we're interested in is there this shift occurring in either how often people engage or how they think about engagement? So part of where this comes from is discussion in the literature around engagement that has suggested that there's this renaissance in public engagement in higher education. And a lot of people hypothesize that this new interest in engagement is partly being driven by graduate students. But this new branch of researchers sees that as a much bigger part of their role or why they're drawn to science. And then there's also this conversation going on, usually separately in the literature, that looks at what role can social media play in facilitating engagement, whether that's making certain types of one-way engagement easier, as Kate was going into, or additionally, as Kate mentioned, whether that's making two-way engagement and types of discourse easier because of the access that scientists have, whether they perceive that there's fewer barriers to engaging, and then the ability of different interested publics to actually talk back with the scientists and have a dialogue. So, as I mentioned, they're interested because social media could shape those types of engagement, and then in turn, certain people might be more likely to engage with social media, or by engaging with social media, might develop different views of the public. And that's getting to, do you think the public will listen to you if you're thinking more one way? Building off of that, going into more two-way, do you think it's your role as a scientist to actually be listening to the public? And do you think that they have valuable insights to offer? But there really isn't, so sorry, I was going more into the scientist role, whether it's your job to be listening, whether you have something to gain from public views. But there's really not much research on scientists' views of engagement overall. I think that's growing, especially in social media. But especially for grad students, there's not, and then there's none that we found that combines grad students and social media. So this is one of the first studies starting to look at that group in particular and their views of engagement specifically through social media. So here's a quick description of the two surveys that we combined for this analysis. So the first one went to faculty in the biological and physical science departments, and that was partly because the survey also included questions on synthetic biology, and most researchers, besides the social scientists that Kate mentioned, are likely housed in those departments who would work with synthetic biology. But also included items on engagement and engagement through social media. That was in 2016. And then Julia did this, expanded that and took the survey item and distributed it to all of the registered graduate students on campus, trying to get a sense of their views of engagement, how frequently they engage. So those are the two studies surveys I'll be pulling from. So this big question, is there that cohort shift? Are graduate students seeing engagement differently, especially through social media, than faculty do? And partly because graduate students are younger and younger people are more likely to use social media, we wanted to see if that could help us understand their views as well. So first we just looked at frequency of engagement. We expect that faculty will engage more often, partly for the reasons that Kate walked through, where seniority plays a large role in whether or not you have the opportunity to engage, access to engagement, because reporters are more likely to reach out to more senior people in their fields. Some people have also talked about institutional factors where maybe your institution doesn't prioritize engagement, and so if you have tenure, you're safe and you can dedicate more time to engaging. But that's a question that we don't go into as much here, what role institutional factors play, but will be a big part of the future research. So as I said, do graduate students see social media differently? I'll go into those exact factors we use to measure this in a second. But what we're especially getting interested in is something that Kate mentioned as well, is social media can not only make engagement easier, but it can make certain types of discussions easier, especially if scientists think that those discussions are appropriate. So in this study, we're looking at whether scientists think that moving in-house conversations, so this would be the conversations that as a scientist you have with your fellow scientists. And traditionally people have thought those only occur within these closed circles of scientists, where you're talking about the validity of published results, you're talking about the controversy that surrounds scientific work. But some have suggested that social media could facilitate moving those discussions into a more public arena, because it is so easy to interact with the public in those cases. So that's something we're interested in, what graduate students and faculty members' views are of having those kind of conversations in a public setting on social media. And then lastly, seeing if there's different views of what the public can offer in engagement, what scientists can offer. So what we used to measure engagement is we looked at how often faculty and graduate students participate in outreach and engagement activities with the public on topics related to their research. Then the other component, because this can be very different, but it's still a form of engaging or doing outreach, is speaking with reporters about your research. So we expected that faculty would do this more often. These graphs, so this shows frequency of people who answered particular responses. So these dark colors mean you answered, I never engage with the public, or I never talk to reporters. As the colors get lighter, that means an increase in frequency. So that top category is you engage a few times a month. So you can see, and the stars mean that there is a significant difference between the two groups. So you have graduate students over here, about 25% of them never engage with the public. With faculty, that's down to about 5%. So you can see that there is a difference. We expected that because of seniority and access. With speaking to reporters, it's even more so because the chances of a graduate student getting reached out to by reporters is much more rare. So this wasn't surprising, but we're more interested in, regardless of how much they're engaging now, what are their views, because that could start to give us a sense of, as they become faculty, will they have different views of engagement than the faculty now do. So, looking at social media, the literature gets into, generally with engagement, there's incentives and barriers. And some of those can be logistical ones, some of those can be what you think of your own efficacy as a presenter, or what you think of the public. Are they hostile? Are they interested? Things like that. So for social media in particular, we asked both groups Do you think it's too time consuming to use social media? Because if they do, they're probably less likely to use it for engagement. Do you think that using it would negatively impact your reputation as a scientist? And this starts to get into norms and sense of self-efficacy as well, because how much control do you think you have over how you're perceived when you communicate, especially in the social media environment where there may be less control than scientists perceive in more traditional engagement. Then on the flip side, we have incentives. So some research has started to look at whether using social media actually increases academic impact, especially around citation rates. So just by interacting more on social media, does your research get more play? And does that turn into actual tangible results that go into consideration in your tenure process and your reputation as a scientist? And then this view of the public, are they actually interested in what you have to say on social media? So here we find a little bit of different views between graduate students and the faculty. So for the most of the items, there's no significant views. They're a little unsure about whether or not it increases academic impact. They mostly agree that lay audiences are interested, so that's cool. That pretty much all researchers that we surveyed on UW campus agree with that. Most of them don't think it's going to affect their reputation, or they're in the middle category where they neither agree or disagree. But where the two differ is graduate students don't think that social media is too time consuming, or they're less likely to agree that it is. So it goes along with they're most likely younger, social media is a bigger part of their lives. And it could suggest that if they don't see that as a barrier, maybe they'll engage more in the future. So now going to what kinds of engagement they're doing on social media. This is looking at those behind the scenes aspects. If you think it's appropriate to talk about controversial results on social media, discuss the validity of peer-reviewed or published results, and then sort of jump ahead of peer review and share results before they've gone through the peer review process, and whether this is okay to do on social media in particular. So here's where we see the biggest difference between the two groups. This middle one, neither group agrees that new findings should be communicated before peer review. So all the researchers are still abiding by that norm that this is how you do science. It has to go through peer review, and then we can discuss it. But that's an important part of the process, and you shouldn't bypass that in public settings. But where the two differ is graduate students very strongly disagree that scientists should not discuss controversial topics on social media. So that suggests that they, even if they won't do it themselves, they still think it is an appropriate thing to do. Whereas faculty at UW, we still get 60% who disagree. They still think, okay, that could be appropriate. But that's pretty different from the graduate students, where it's 85% disagree. And I think that these are conversations that could be or should be happening. Then on your right, scientists should comment on the validity of published results on social media. Here as well, we see that about 40% of graduate students agree with this, compared to 25% of faculty. So that's another big difference. So they're moving these, I think it's more appropriate to move these typically in-house conversations into a public sphere on social media. And that could suggest moving more into two-way engagement, if you think that that's something that should be done, or it could suggest a different view of what it means to be a scientist. Is it your job to be addressing these controversial issues, to sort of be policing science in a public forum? Okay, last graph. This gets into those factors that can help determine how frequently people engage and whether they see engagement more as a one-way or two-way process. So the first one, do you think communicating does anything? This is relevant for one-way communication and two-way communication, because you're not going to put your energy into something that you don't think is going to have an impact. Then this gets more to the two-way. Do you think when you're discussing with the public, you're not just sharing information with them, but you're actually pulling interesting information and insights as well? And then lastly, do you think it's your role as a scientist to pay attention to those insights or those wishes, even if you totally disagree? Is it still worth understanding where the public's coming from and why? So for the most part, there's pretty positive views of, or I guess pro-engagement views of the public and of the role of scientists. Graduate students and faculty are both similar in thinking that communicating can affect attitudes towards science, and that scientists should be paying attention to what the public thinks about science. But where we see a significant difference is graduate students are more likely to think that lay audiences can bring valuable perspectives. And it seems like what's driving that distance is in the amount of people who strongly agree. So it's not so much that faculty don't agree with this, but the strength of agreement is much higher among graduate students. But I think this is something that the public offers. Okay. So quick review, is there a shift in engagement? It looks like there could be. We need to do more research, which is a little bit what Kate will go into, but we expected that currently graduate students wouldn't be engaging as much, but we want to look at whether that holds up over time, if as they become faculty they do start engaging, and if they start engaging, are they engaging at a higher level than previous faculty used to? Are we actually seeing a change? And what role do institutional and cultural factors play in either facilitating that engagement, or is it when they become junior faculty, they're too busy, engagement isn't prioritized in the tenure process, and they actually start to lose their interest or their ability to engage. On seeing social media as less time consuming, that could be nice. That might mean that they're using social media more, which could mean that they're engaging in different ways. But that's something that we'd have to look more into and seeing if graduate students do use social media for engagement and what does that look like. And then with this moving, he's talking about controversial science issues, discussing the validity of science. It would be interesting to do interviews with graduate students and start to see why they have those views. Do they see their role as scientists differently? Do they get into science because they recognize that it has societal impacts? Or have they just started to realize that you can't do science without having this discussion? So this would be a great spot for more qualitative or really detailed survey research. If anyone's interested in doing that. And then also, it could suggest that you think different types of engagement are appropriate, like that two-way dialogue might really be necessary for facilitating effective engagement. And then overall, UW is a pretty pro-engagement place in terms of the views of what scientists should be doing, what the public can offer, but we do see that graduate students are slightly more likely to value lay audience insight into science and science topics, which again could suggest if they do keep engaging, or they engage more as they become faculty, maybe they'll be engaging in different ways, possibly through social media. So these are all questions where we would need to start following groups over time to see if this is actually occurring, and moving more into what Kate's going to get into, which is looking at how much institutional factors and cultures facilitate this. So is UW weird because we have the Wisconsin idea, or other places have similar ideas or more barriers to engaging?
Switching places. So like Emily said, what we're getting into next is really focusing on, is it something weird about UW? Is it something weird about certain universities? But really what's going on that really drives when people want to engage and when they have different views of the public. So what else predicts engagement beyond the individual factors and some of the things that Emily talked about? So we have, again, new media environment, maybe sometimes impacting that, or maybe at least growing up with the new media environment and social media. Social norms, so is there a cohort shift that's occurring in terms of it's acceptable or a lot of your peers are engaging? Is it that views of the role of the science and scientists are changing? Or is it really just something about that there's been a shift in the engagement climate and culture, and this is related to the social norms as well? And so one of the questions remains, and one of the things we're really going to be focusing on, is it something about the universities themselves? So beyond the Wisconsin idea, land-grant universities. So does everyone know what a land-grant university is? Got a couple of nods, a couple shakes. Okay. So the Wisconsin idea, like we talked about, the idea that what's produced on campus should also give back to the community. And so this is based also in land-grant universities. So land-grant universities were established in the Morrill Act of 1862, which is super fun information to know for fun facts. The idea, the thing to really focus on, is that there's a couple different or missions that were given. Missions, that's a little bit overly dramatic, but the act was established to give for universities where they really wanted to have a couple different things that were coming from these universities that were established with land-grant universities. So the act gave different states could have plots of land to build these universities, and the idea was that at the time there was a kind of an argument going on in terms of what information is important for people who are at universities to know. And so there was more of like the classical studies versus more practical knowledge. And so the idea was that land-grant universities would help build this practical knowledge that would help people in the state. So teach branches of learning related to agriculture and the mechanic arts, and really the education of the industrial classes and several pursuits and professions in life, which sounds a little bit demeaning when we look at it now, but it's really just this idea of giving back to people like more practical knowledge. And so beyond just, this was how things were established, and then there were a couple different updates that happened in terms of what the what land-grant universities were asked to do. And so there was another act in 1914 that was really expanded this idea of not only what type of knowledge are they imparting, so the classics versus the more practical professional knowledge and agricultural based, but also really asking them to do a commitment to outreach and service. So asking that colleges in several communities imparting information for those who are not at that university that's otherwise necessary and will help them with their lives. And so this is really where we have the service and the outreach call that are coming from these acts and with the established land-grant communities. And so one of the things that we're really wanting to look at is whether that's something that is inherent to these land-grant universities and whether that is really where the impetus for having engagement is coming from, because people who are at these universities are in this culture of having I'm just going to keep saying mission, but having a mission to be engaging, to being outreach, to giving service back to the community. And so this is also going along with the institutional factors and different levels. And so land-grant universities, there are different acts, different numbers, but with the original Morrill Act, there was 77 universities that came from that, and then it was expanded to 77, and then it was expanded later on. So I think 106 is where we're at now, or somewhere around there. But they're all across the United States. And so the factors that we really want to look at are social norms. So again, is there a mindset, is there something that's going on in these universities at the departmental or at the institutional level that's creating a social norm where it's acceptable to be involved in public engagement? That goes along with the climate and culture. And then commitment to service at land-grant universities, is it just that they have this service mission and so they're responding to it? And then also more institutional opportunities. So at universities, communication departments, communication outreach, is there opportunities that university is creating through things like the Wisconsin Science Festival or other ways where faculty members who want to get involved can easily do so, or there are not really many opportunities that are occurring here. And then lastly, as Emily talked about, institutional incentives. So does the tenure process prioritize engagement? Is there in the annual review process, when people are hired, are people being given incentives for actually engaging? And so these are the things we're really looking at, focusing on land-grant universities, how much these impactors, these institutional and departmental factors impact engagement, so beyond just the individual. So with that, I think we will wrap up. And is there any question?